Thank you, gentlemen. We appreciate your testimony. Acting Administrator Elwell, although the investigations of both of these crashes are still ongoing, the investigators have gathered enough data to confirm similarities between the two crashes. The most prominent link seems to be a new software unique to the Boeing 737 MAX called the Maneuvering Characteristics Augmentation System, more commonly known as MCAS. From the FAA's perspective, was there any information on this new MCAS system that was required to be included or was included in the, quote, short self-administered online course that pilots are required to go through before flying the MAX?
Mr. Chairman, thank you for that question. The MCAS system is indeed, as I mentioned, of great attention in both of these tragic accidents. And the MCAS is actually a sub-device to a system called the speed trim system that is in the NG, in the prior 737. What the MCAS does is 737 MAX is a fly-by-wire aircraft. Fly-by-wire aircraft, the controls, the yoke, that controls the flight controls needs to feel right to a pilot. And so what the MCAS does is it gives inputs to the flight controls when necessary in a very thin envelope, thin piece of the flight envelope in certain regimes so that the pilots, the yoke feels exactly like it should. And in this case, the MCAS made the MAX feel exactly like the NG to fly. So for that reason, we gave it an amended type certificate because of its similarity to the NG, because of what the MCAS system aided the pilots in the feel and the fly of the airplane. And we have, for a certification of this type, a flight standardization board comprised of pilots from Europe, Canada, the United States, who come together and fly the aircraft that is being amended, in this case 737 NG, and the new aircraft. And they fly it and are monitored by engineers and experts specifically to see if they have or notice differences in the flight characteristics, the handling characteristics of the new airplane, because that would trigger us to need flight training for this new device.
Administrator Elwell, let me try to refocus you back on the specific question I asked, which is, was there any information on the MCAS that was included in the short self-administered online course that pilots were required to go through?
There was not specific instruction on the MCAS to my knowledge, specifically because it was not a system that went directly to what the pilots flew on the MAX, the difference between the MAX and the NG.
Well, that might be true in ordinary circumstances, but as I understand it, on previous versions of the 737, when the pilot pulled back on the yoke, it cut off the electronic control of the stabilizers. But with the MCAS, it did not. And presumably pilots would not know this if it was not included in their training and they were not made aware of that. Is that correct?
So, Senator, the MCAS gives input to the flight controls, as I said, in a very small flight envelope. In this case we're talking about here, errant information to that system would make it give input where it's not needed and where it's not wanted. And only in manual flight. And pilots are trained when they get an input into their flight controls that they did not ask for, that is not appropriate for the regime of flight, then they go through procedures. In this case, it's called runaway stabilizer trim procedure, and that is what would be done in this instance. In normal operation for the MCAS, you would never feel the input.
Did these pilots' training or procedure let them know that pulling back the yoke would not disengage this system?
I'm not quite sure what you're referring to about pulling back the yoke and stopping it, because that's not actually a
So I'm reading a quote from the New York Times on February 3rd, 2019, where the Times reported older 737s had a way of addressing certain control problems with the stabilizers. Pulling back on the yoke or control column would cut off electronic control of the stabilizers, allowing the pilots to control them manually. And that was not true with the 737 MAX. Now, is that correct factually? I'm relying on the Times reporting here.
So I don't believe that's correct. They're the same ways to deal with the MCAS inappropriate input is the same thing a pilot would do for runaway stab trim for an NG. It's the same input and the same procedure. In fact, the procedure for runaway stab trim does not change from the NG to the MAX. It presents itself the same way, and it's dealt with the same way.
Now, the MCAS system itself relied on angle of attack sensors that, as the Washington Post reported, quote, angle of attack sensors have been flagged as problems more than 50 times on U.S. commercial airplanes over the past 5 years. How did the FAA come to the conclusion that it was appropriate to certify an anti-stall software system, the MCAS, that not only drew data from a sensor that had a history of problems, but also that didn't have redundancy?
So the AOA vanes are an input to the MCAS system. The MCAS system is actually not an anti-stall system. It's not a system unto itself. It is a supplement to, as I said, the speed trim system that existed in the NG, does the same thing that this STS does in the NG. I am not aware of AOAs being a problem. 50 malfunctions of an AOA or 50 maintenance procedures to an AOA across the gamut of flight where AOA vanes and all of the flights that use AOA is not in the, you're talking about numbers of hundreds of thousands of flights.
Unless there's a system where the malfunction then causes the plane to crash, then that is a serious issue.
Well, sir, it is still yet to be determined if the malfunctioning of the AOA caused the crash. We actually don't know the cause of the crash. There's a lot more to find out through the investigation. But I am confident in, I'm confident in the AOA vanes that are produced and put on airplanes, and I'm confident in the MCAS system. Now, where we need to go is we need to get all the information, all the data from the accident to determine the interaction between all of them. And it isn't just airframe, or it isn't just the AOA, it isn't just the MCAS. There's quite a few more factors in any investigation that we have to determine. We have to gather the data. We're a data-driven organization, and we make our decisions based on the data collected, and we still have a lot of data to collect, sir.
Senator Sinema.